Hi guys, how are you? Okay, I'm pretty nervous, so let me start. My name is Caio Santucci. I have this YouTube channel about comics, fan of heroes, and today we're here with a very important interviewee. And to help me in this special video, I called my friend Giovanni Spinelli from Nerd Vintage. How are you, buddy?
Hello, Kyle. It's such a big pleasure to be here to you this evening. Such a great interview. Let's go there.
At some point, probably Giovanni will cry and you will understand why. So today we're together with one of the most important comic book writers. He worked in Spider-Man, co-created Titans with George Paris, and revolutionized the comic book industry with Crise on Infinity Earths. I'm here with Mr. Marv Wolfman. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
We're great. Wow, we can't believe you're here. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And I have to say, what a beautiful background you have there.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's the better background an interviewee uses.
Yeah, I like it. I sort of recognize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great choice.
Yeah. So, okay, Mr. Wolfman, to start, my first question is always the same. Who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah.
Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
For everyone out there to know, I have bad hearing, so I'm going to be repeating almost every question to make sure I actually hear it. Who am I? I'm Marv Wolfman, writer, editor in comics, animation, and other things, and video games and such.
So I will pass the word to Giovanni. Giovanni, you can ask the stuff.
Sure. Let's go there, Mr. Wolfman. Recently, you wrote a new origin for Superman called Man and Superman. Can you tell us a little bit of the birth of this idea of bringing a new beginning or a new vision for the first days of Man of Steel again?
I love writing Superman. If you go on my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of me about 8 years old wearing a Superman shirt. So, and that's at a time when there was no merchandising. This was a special thing through a cereal company, of all things. You couldn't buy a Superman shirt on the stands. I love writing it. I was given a lot of freedom to write it the way I wanted to. I just had to cover a few things. He's a great character, and I had a ball writing it. I always do. And the reviews have started to come in today because today is went on sale. So the reviews are already starting to hit the Facebook pages, and they've all been real good. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's a wonderful story. I love this new origin and the way you focus on the humanity of Clark. I love it, Mr. Wolfman.
Well, I think nobody's interested in just writing about people you can't understand.
Yeah.
To me, it's always about people. All the stories have to be, why does this person think it's important? Why does he care? Why does Superman do what he wants? What does Lois and John and all the others, what do they actually think? Yeah. If you stick to writing about characters, people will be drawn into the story, I believe, as opposed to just writing about a plot, because we've read every plot that's ever happened. I don't believe there's probably a new plot anywhere, but if you write about characters, that is always new.
That's perfect.
Please answer gets me.
Yeah. And still talking about DC, you co-created and worked with the Titans for many years, bringing them popularity they have today. And how can I ask, what is it like for you as a comic book creator to see these characters transcend the boundaries of comics and become so popular?
It means I've done my job. I'm hired to write a story that will get people to want to read it, that they'll care about it, that they'll like it. And when something like the Titans, created by both me and George Perez, transcends, as you may say, or goes out beyond the comics itself, it really means that people like these characters. And I'm very thankful for that, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
We're trying to engage people with good stories, and Titans clicked, and I'm so thrilled. Of course, George's art certainly is so much responsible for a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine Teen Titans were basically my whole childhood, watching it. So being here with you, it's crazy. But
Thank you.
I'll let Giovanni say something about Titans too, because this question is very important.
Let's go there, Caio. This following question is from a big fan of you. His name is Manuel Taylor. Obrigado, Manuel. About Cyborg, a character created by you for the new Teen Titans. He's a character most feared for the people around it, right? Because of his condition of being half man and half machine. How much of this dynamic is also related to racial cause? Is this a writer thinking during the conception of the character back in the 80s?
I'm sorry. I hate to do this, but I'm just not understanding the question.
Sure.
I could talk about Cyborg. I mean, because he's one of my favorites. He's a character that I loved, and George loved. George felt he was one of the closer characters to his family. And I thought of him as the genius character who doesn't want to be that character. He is very smart. He is really good at what he does. And he didn't want to, becoming Cyborg destroyed his life, he believes, because he wanted to be an athlete, even though he was pretty much being groomed as a scientist. And he really wanted to be an athlete, but when you could do anything better than anyone else because of becoming a cyborg, it totally destroyed what he wanted. And his story was taking him from those depths, those low points, and letting him understand the good that he can do. And he becomes a very positive force. So he's like any one of us who has to take all the bad that happens in the world, because bad happens in the world all the time, and yet make it work, yet make it better for yourself and better for others. Does that remotely answer your question?
Oh, a lot. You answered a lot. Thank you so much. I love how deep is Cyborg. I love this concept.
Well, one of the things that we did that I was very adamant about on Cyborg was that he has a family. You don't see that a lot with a lot of the superheroes out there. He has a family. His father was alive, but his grandparents are very important to the story. The people he meets, they're all very important to the story and to Cyborg himself. So the fact he's grounded in a reality. In many ways, all the Titans are like that. They all have problems, but they all have family as well. Raven has the family in Nazareth. Starfire on Tamaran, Vic here on Earth. And we played to that family aspect of the characters as much as we could.
Such a nice answer. I love this family side and grounded in the Titans. It's what I almost love in Titans is this human part. Again, saying it again about humanity.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, you have to write about the characters. You have to be honest to who the characters are. And hopefully, if you're not only honest to them, but you write interestingly, people may like it. You only can hope. There's so many comics out there. So if you could break through all the noise and introduce a character that people like, I think it's wonderful.
That's wonderful enough. That's great.
Mr. Wolfman, please don't be ashamed of asking us for repeat how many times you need. Okay, we're here to help, and we really hope. You can say. I'm sorry.
No, I would say it's a problem in that I'm constantly having to ask it. The voices also come off as very bass, and therefore it's hard to hear with that. But we'll do the best we can.
Yeah, there's no problem.
Don't worry.
I expect you to do a ton of editing.
Yeah, no problem. Please ask us all the things you need to ask. We have to, I don't know, this necessity of being comfortable for you and for all of us. So please don't
I
be shy.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the next question and about DC again. So Fitz says that 80s, 85s, and 86 were the best years for superhero comics. It was at that time that great classics like Crisis, Dark Knight, Watchmen came out. In your opinion, what was that great boon of creativity of in the 80s, you know?
I believe some of it was the fact that royalties were offered for the
Yeah.
first time in the history of comics, and therefore people knew very specifically that the work they did mattered in terms of sales, that mattered in terms of what we were presenting to the readers. You could do anything back in the past, but those things tended to be forgotten. Now, all the writers, at least, wanted to write about stories that mattered to them, that were important, that were just not about hitting somebody else. So many superhero comics back in the 50s and certainly in the 40s and maybe in the 60s were about the action. Yes. Everyone talked about the action. But as I keep saying, and I will always say, it's about the characters. And I think we were given a freedom now to write it. When George and I did a story in Teen Titans 8, it was Day in the Life, was the first time you had a story, just what the superheroes do on their day off. Yeah. There was not a bit of action in the story. It was all about character. And Dark Knight was about that character, about what it's like to be at the end of your career in many ways. And Watchmen was about all these characters taking their powers and doing weird things with them, but it was all about the characters again. Yeah. And I think we were allowed now to write the stuff that mattered to us. We weren't just writing to a mindless audience. Also, because of the price of comics, little kids weren't buying them. Therefore, if your audience was teenagers and up, you could write stories that mattered to them because they were the ones who could afford to buy a book. Yeah. So it was all of that stuff. It was just the idea that you were able to tell the story you wanted, and the companies were happy to have a slightly more adult approach to it because that's who our readers were now.
Yeah, perfect. Well,
so it all came together wonderfully.
It was an awesome answer. I'm with no response for that. So yeah, I totally agree. It's I know how could I say a turn point on the comics, right? So that's really crazy. And Giovanni, you can go ahead.
Still back in the 80s, about 1986, about Crise Nas Infinitas Terras, Marv. The story told us that there was a person responsible for reading all the DC Comics books published until that year, and be some kind of base of information for you and George Paris. And how was this dynamic at the time? Do you work together in an office? Do you trade letters, telephone? How was it?
George and I were friends. We had become friends at Marvel, but not close friends until DC, because we were working together on a monthly basis. George lived about 5 blocks from my house. So we'd get together for lunch and we'd get together and talk. I'd come in with the story, the approach that I wanted, what the story was about, created the villains, all of that stuff. And then George and I would sit for several hours at this diner and work that up into the story, using all the things that I had wanted, that I come in with, the plot that I had come in with. But now we were breaking it down into art and breaking it down into how we can make the art carry more weight by being more integral to the story itself. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, sure.
Because sometimes the art in a lot of comics just told the story.
Yeah.
And the people weren't connected. You never knew who was drawing the book. You never knew who was writing the book. For the first time, we were getting together and we'd talk it out and we'd go, okay, I want this. How can we make this work the best? How do we let the art really make this an important thing rather than words alone? It's a tricky thing to do, but we were really, because we lived so close together and because we were friends, George and I also had a viewpoint. If either one of us didn't like an idea, we didn't argue about it. We just come up with something else, because it's important, I believe, in a group effort like the Titans or like any book, that that the writer and the artist are on the same page. And it's not worth arguing over a plot point when you could come up with another plot point. They're always easy for us to come up with. So for us, it was important that we both really were on the same page, that we really loved working together, and we would tell the story that both of us wanted, and we wouldn't be compromising. I wasn't saying to George, no, that's a stupid idea. George wasn't saying to me, that's a stupid idea. We go, I have a problem. Okay, let's come up with something better. I've told this story before, but it's really an important one, because the fans are the ones who in many ways were responsible for it. I was writing Green Lantern, and one of the letters that came in from a fan said that the DC universe is so complicated and they didn't understand it. And I could understand that because I was at Marvel for a long time, and the Marvel people were not interested in DC because they were so complex. This is before everyone knew what a metaverse was. This was before people knew about alternate universes or any of that. And the Marvel fans had no understanding of, there are 5 Supermans, there's 20 Flashes, there's all these characters. I don't understand it. What are you going to do about it? So I was writing the letter columns at that time, writing the answers to the letter columns. I wasn't writing the letters.
So cool.
And I went, we'll have to think about something coming up. I was heading to a comic convention along with a bunch of DC guys, and I got there first. I happened to get to the train station very early, and I'm sitting there waiting for everyone else to show up, and I'm thinking about this letter that came in, and I said, and suddenly the entire plot for Crisis came together. I knew what the whole story was. I mean, not the details, but all the concepts of the story.
Yeah.
So everybody came. We all met at the train station, and on the trip down to Philadelphia, I told them what I had come up with, and everyone thought it was great. Nobody had done anything like that. But nobody will accept this. You can't kill off characters. You can't change all this stuff. I said, sales are not very good at DC at this particular point. They're really bad. The only book that was selling well was Titans.
Yeah. So
on the Monday after the convention, went into Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher, and pitched the idea, and she loved it. Because this was a chance to start DC over again and make it so people could start following it who had not read it before. If you wanted to have a multiverse, you started fresh. You started as if it's happening right now, not that you have to explain 5,000 continuity things that had happened. You could start today. And I think that's really important. I spent a couple of years before George was even involved with the story, plotting it, starting to work out the entire story. George was going to go off and do something else because we had worked together for so many years, and he wanted to do some other jobs too. He wanted to write as well, and I encouraged that. He gave him some backup stuff to do. And George, every time he'd come into the office, he would say, how's your story coming? And I would describe it to him. And I'd let him know all the characters that were coming in. I'd let him know all of this stuff. And finally he said, I can't take it anymore. I have to draw this. And I said, thank God. Nobody but you could draw it. And that's when George came in on the book. And that's how we got started. We hired somebody to do, a fan, Peter Sanderson, to read all the DC comics. Yeah. But it turned, and he worked on it for years. He read every single book and took extensive notes. But when I got down to actually writing the Crisis, I didn't need them. The story wasn't about specific history, because that would be the same as what DC was. You have to worry about everything that happened in the past, otherwise you don't get it. The story was about something else. So I suggested we use all the information that Peter had gathered, because it was really important information on who our characters were. And let's do a book like Who's Who. And let's take all that information and put it into the Who's Who. Meanwhile, I'll write the story, because I knew all the characters. I had read pretty much every DC comic ever done. When I was an intern at DC as a kid, at lunchtime, I would sit in the library and read the books. So I read the books starting in 1938, and I read everything up. So I knew this stuff, and I didn't need Peter's information, but it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect for Who's Who.
What a wonderful story. I also love Who's Who, and I didn't know that it's the origin of this fact. It's great to hear this history from you, Marv. Great.
Yeah.
And still talking about the crisis, well, this series revolutionized superhero comics. And did you, as a writer, feel a difference in the comics industry writing before and after this story? Like, I don't know, between these two times, before the crisis?
I'm not sure. Can you?
Of course, of course. I'm asking.
Giovanni, can you? Your voice is a little bit different, and I hear you a little bit better. Can you repeat what?
Sure,
what
sure. He's asking about the difference between write comics before Crise on Infinite Earths and after Crise on Infinite Earths. What was the difference at the time?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I heard the question. Previously, I think I had a lot of problem with the other writers at DC on Crisis, because they were all real fans of the stuff, as was I. The only difference was that I saw that there was a real problem, or I felt there was a real problem, and wanted to fix it. And a lot of the other writers, and they're on record, you could find interviews with them saying how much they hated the Crisis. They all didn't want it. They didn't like the idea of characters dying. They didn't like the idea of worlds changing. They didn't like any of those ideas. And I understood it, because I was a fan. I hated to see some of that stuff done, but it was really important, I thought, for DC to, let me backtrack. At that time, the fans were calling themselves Marvel zombies. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Okay.
Yeah, again.
Because they didn't care what Marvel did. They loved Marvel and they hated DC. It was really important, in my mind, to make DC a company that they would check out at least. My view was there are a lot of good books, there's a lot of really good writers, but if you don't check it out, you won't know it. So it's important to check it out, and it's important for you to do that. And prior to that, I think the fans were just confused by a lot of the DC stuff. Afterwards, they gave it a try because there was so much attention to it, and they discovered that they loved the characters. The characters were really solid characters. One of the things that I did that I can tell you only Alan Moore figured out what I did here. Yeah. He wrote me a letter after the first issue of Crisis came out. If you look at the first issue, within you're in the universe of the evil superheroes. They're all the Injustice gang. They're all those characters, the bad guys. It's an entire universe of bad guys. And there's Ultraman, who was the bad guy Superman. There was, I'm forgetting names now, but all the DC characters had doppelgangers who were evil.
Yeah.
And what I did was I wanted to introduce first how powerful the villain was, because in 4 pages, he kills all the bad guys. Now, if you think about it, you go, so what? They're the bad guys. But without realizing it, the readers are going, he just killed Superman because the guy has all the power. He just killed Wonder Woman. How powerful is this guy? He just killed all these characters. So you suddenly realize that you have this incredible villain. The other thing was the first issue of Crisis, even the second and the third, if you notice, there's no major heroes in it, no major superheroes. Superman isn't in them, Batman isn't in them, Wonder Woman isn't in them, Green Lantern isn't in them. The reason for that was, my feeling was, if you were a Marvel fan and you didn't like DC, you probably didn't like those characters.
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce you to all the other characters first. I'm going to introduce you to all these people you didn't even know DC published.
Yeah.
So the idea was to excite them with that and then bring in Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman a few issues later where, okay, I'm willing to give them a try now because I like the first couple of issues without Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Maybe they aren't that bad after all. And that worked. And people started to buy all those books.
You've created a lot of important characters for DC's timeline over the years. And was there any case where you thought of a simple character just to make a cameo, and in the end, he gained a huge importance in the comics, in the DC comics?
You never know how the readers are going to take anything that you present.
Yeah.
I've created characters that I was positive was going to be a hit, that people would really like, and turns out they didn't. And I turned out characters that I thought were just okay, that people liked. What you have to do is, in my mind, you should always create characters. If all you do is take the characters from the old days, you're not adding anything into the story. You're not making them special. You just have to keep working at it and try and make characters that are interesting. I don't think I answered your question, though. Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you get it
Perfectly. Perfectly.
Okay.
It's about Marvel this time, Mr. Marv. About Spider-Man. During your run at the magazine Amazing Spider-Man, you gave such a good shake on Peter Parker life and the status quo. You got a first marriage-esque proposal to MJ, the comeback of Betty Brant, college graduation, the rematch against Uncle Ben's killer, and another of great moments of the characters. And the hit of this is the first appearance of Black Cat. And how is to propose to Marvel Comics at the time all these changes in the Spider-Man life?
My feeling about Spider-Man, Spider-Man's my favorite Marvel character, whereas Superman is my favorite DC character.
Yeah.
My feeling was that they had gotten off track on Spider-Man. Spider-Man was about this kid who screwed up, whose life was crappy because he keeps making the wrong choices, and suddenly he becomes a superhero and he still makes the wrong choices. It was really a story about sort of a loser who pulls himself together, but only when he wears a costume. Otherwise, his life is exactly as bad as it always has been. And when I actually spoke to Steve Ditko about Spider-Man, and his feeling was that Spider-Man should never have been older than 16, because 16, he said, was the last year you could screw up as a kid. Once you're 17, you start to become an adult. And it's not charming to have an adult screw up the way you could have a kid screw up in those fashions. So my feeling was that here he was with Mary Jane. She's a model. She is gorgeous. How is Peter Parker a loser if he's dating a supermodel?
Yeah.
How is he ever having a problem if all these things are actually working out for him? So I wanted to go back and move it back to where it had been, what Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and Stan and John Romita did. And I wanted it to be a character that we could understand a lot better, because he's a flop. He's a failure who's going to keep going at it anyway. And that's why I made those changes. Every one of them was to bring Spider-Man back. And yet you don't want to repeat the stories or the concepts from the 1960s. It was already the late 1970s. So you had to update it while you also emotionally brought him to a different place.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Marv, I miss you in Spider-Man, actually. Spider-Man needs your vision back.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
But
Yes.
there's also the second question about Spider-Man. There's a little bit fan question. Still about Spider-Man, Marv. You as a New Yorker and have been living in Brooklyn and Queens in your life. How was to work with the most New Yorker character from comics that really lives and swim webs through the same places that you live your life? How was it?
Oh, I think when Stan and Steve created Spider-Man and put him in New York, they used New York icons. And I thought it was great. I love that. It felt a connection. It's the reason why later, when I did the Teen Titans, they were in New York. They were not in a mythical city, which is what DC always had. It was either Metropolis or Gotham or Coast City or Ivy Town. You know, DC always used the made-up cities, and I really like the whole idea of setting it where we knew it could go. Now, in the very beginning, I was working with artist Ross Andrew. Ross was also a New Yorker, but Ross was insane about research. So if I wrote that we were on the tram to Roosevelt Island, and there is one, he actually went there, photographed it all, so it would be real. It gave the book a reality. You're setting them in a real city. You're setting them so that people who know New York will say, okay, he's right here. He's with us. And people who don't know New York, they'll be surprised, and you know, that's fine. They're used to Metropolis and Gotham anyway. You know, so
I used to love New York because of Spider-Man comics, and it's beautiful to see you talk about Resender and they are in really New York. I'd be happy to see. I was really seeing New York there. I love Resender, by the way. Great work with Spider-Man.
So do I. I love working with Ross.
It was a great run, really.
And now we have our two final questions. That is two fan questions. We will open our hearts, and I don't know. I will just let Giovanni say.
Right. That's my last question, Mr. Marv Wolfman. So the start of your career is so vast that end is up mixing up, intermingling with the story of the chronology of comic books and Marvel and DC characters. How does it feel to have been a part of projects that made these characters the popularity they have today? And finally, how does it feel to be a living comic book legend?
Better than a dead comic book writer. You know, I'm not sure I understood the first part of that.
I ask you about how is the feeling of being the responsible to most of the popularity these characters have today? You wrote all of this, right?
But I think, as I said earlier, there's a real thrill that other people, who very talented people, like it. The fans, you know, they approach it on a emotional basis, which they should. It's exactly what you should do when you're reading anything, whether it's a comic or a book or whatever else. Having another writer say what you did there, the structure of that, the way you flip the scenes, that's a real good feeling, because you're talking to your peers, and your peers like the material. I love it when my stuff appears on TV. I love it when you realize there are 3 Teen Titans shows on simultaneously right now. Comedy Central, I'm sorry, Cartoon Network is doing Teen Titans Go for the youngest kids. They're just announced, I think yesterday, they're bringing back the Teen Titans show that from a few years ago for the next age group. And then you have the adult live action series. So we hit everybody. And that's a really great feeling that the characters are that popular that people of all ages could want to read them. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. I just never thought it would happen.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's such a beautiful answer. This I get emotionally just to see you talking about this character you create,
Well,
and I get emotional to see your work on TV too and movies also.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well.
It's beautiful.
and you had
I-
another question?
Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to complete the last question of Giovanni and ask for you how is I don't know how is for you see that fans of the whole world it's calling you as a legend. You know, it's saying that you're a legend. How Giovanni did and I did too.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yes, I will try to, I don't know, I will try to remake this question. Então, galera, como o Marv disse, ele tem um pequeno problema de audição e nessa hora a gente estava para encerrar o programa, estava um pouco corrido e a gente estava bem emocionado. Então, nessa hora, eu fiz uma pergunta tentando complementar o que o Giovanni tinha dito, mas infelizmente ele não entendeu e o Giovanni também não entendeu o que eu estava perguntando, porque não era uma pergunta que estava na nossa pauta. E acabou que o Giovanni fez a última pergunta do episódio, tá bom? Que era o que eu tinha perguntado aí, qual o legado que ele acha que vai deixar para os quadrinhos. Eu espero que vocês curtam a entrevista e não esqueçam de se inscrever, tá? Desculpa qualquer equívoco e beijão. How is for you?
Oh, Giovanni, can you do it?
Yeah, perfect.
Sure.
I'm really sorry.
No, that's okay.
Don't worry.
Don't be
worry,
sorry.
Mr. Wolfman. I'll be reading the Caio Santucci question here he sent me. Let's go, Marv. What is the legacy you think you can bring to the comics world and the comics fan by now? What is the legacy you gave to all of us after all these years doing your job?
Really, legacy is for other people to determine.
Yeah.
I just did the type of stories that I enjoyed. I really was writing stuff for me, whether it's way back at the beginning of my career with Tomb of Dracula, or then Spider-Man and Daredevil and Fantastic Four, and then Superman and Batman and all of those. I just wanted to write stories that I enjoyed. I hope others felt that I wrote stories that were interesting to them, that were not the same cookie cutter type stories all the time. I just hope that people like the stories, as I did when I was a kid, reading every issue of Superman and Batman and all of those books, and Richie Rich and Archie, and I read all the different comics, and it didn't matter to me if it was Archie or if it was Superman. I just enjoyed comics. And if my material, if what I wrote gives a new reader that same love of comics, I think that it will be very successful, and more than I could have hoped for.
That's perfect. Sir, thank you so much for coming. We're very happy. I'll let Giovanni say what has in his heart, and we'll finish then.
Well, thank you very much. You guys take care.
Take care, Marv. Thank you so much. We didn't have time to talk about Fantastic Four, Daredevil, a lot of work that you do, but I would love to. I'd love to talk to you, and
Yeah.
it was a great honor. Thank you so much.
You take care.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye-bye.